All right, so thanks to Dr. Volkoff for getting us started here, and I think maybe the transition from what she's just been saying to the next session is that now we'll be hearing from various members of the FDA community. So clearly at the center of our charge is helping advise FDA to how to best to take public health considerations into account in its regulatory decision making and in balancing the risks and benefits of opioid analgesics. So the next session we're going to hear from FDA representatives. First, Doctors Joshua Lloyd and Peter Lurie will give their perspectives on this topic, and then they'll be joined for the discussion by Doctors Hertz and Throckmorton. So I think what I'll do, and let me give you a little bit of a heads up with regard to the schedule. So we are about 10 minutes behind. Let's just go ahead and instead of adjourning for the break at 10:10, aim for about 10:20, and we'll basically be robbing the break here with the substantive time. So I'll introduce first Dr. Lloyd. Dr. Lloyd is a lead medical officer in the Division of Anesthesia, Analgesia, and Addiction Products at the FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. In this role, he leads a team of clinicians who review and evaluate scientific data to assess new analgesic drugs, provide advice to sponsors regarding their development programs throughout the drug development process, review proposed drug labels to determine whether they contain truthful claims about the product's effectiveness, appropriate warnings and precautions about the product's safety, and adequate directions for the product's use, and conduct ongoing oversight of approved products to ensure their continued safety in the post-approval setting. Dr. Lloyd joined the FDA in 2011. Dr. Lloyd.
Thank you. Good morning. As mentioned, I'm at the Division of Anesthesia, Analgesia, and Addiction Products at the FDA, and we're the division responsible for evaluating opioid analgesics. At this point, I don't think I need to spend much time going over statistics to highlight the devastating impact that the opioid epidemic has had on our country. But I would like to thank the committee for tackling these vitally important questions that we have posed to the national academies in this area to help us as we at FDA continue to address this epidemic. In the first part of the talk, I'll discuss the FDA's Opioids Action Plan with an emphasis on re-examining the risk-benefit paradigm for opioids. As the opioid epidemic has unfolded, FDA has remained committed to ensure that patients who are in pain have access to effective pain relief. Despite the fact that pain is best treated with a comprehensive multidisciplinary approach where pharmacologic treatment is not the sole focus, for a variety of social and economic reasons, the treatment of pain has largely remained reliant on pharmacologic therapy. And the availability of prescription opioids have been an important component of that approach. FDA has to balance ensuring that analgesics are available for those patients who need them while protecting the public health from the associated negative consequences of opioids, namely misuse, abuse, overdose, and death. In that regard, FDA aims to reduce the misuse and abuse of prescription opioids through preventing prescription drug abuse, treating opioid addiction, and saving lives from opioid overdose. Earlier this year, Dr. Califf announced the agency's Opioids Action Plan, a comprehensive plan to take concrete steps towards reducing the impact of the opioid epidemic on American families and communities. These are the components of the Opioids Action Plan. Based on recommendations that this committee will make, FDA plans to fundamentally re-examine the risk-benefit paradigm for opioids to ensure that the agency formally considers the broader public health impacts in addition to considering the risks and benefits to individual patients and the intended patient population. Additionally, the agency is expanding the use of advisory committees, strengthening opioid labeling to enhance safety information, considering updates to the IRLA-REMS, enhancing the post-marketing requirements to get much-needed real-world data, and expanding access to opioid formulations intended to discourage abuse, as well as supporting better treatment options for addiction and pain and preventing opioid overdose deaths. One of the components of the action plan is for FDA to increase outside engagement in this area. In that spirit, we have contracted the national academies to convene this committee to help us identify additional actions that we may take to address the opioid epidemic. One of the most critical components of our request for this committee is to provide recommendations to develop a framework for opioid review, approval, and monitoring that balances both the individual need for pain control with considerations of the broader public health impacts. The focus of this public workshop is on the last bullet of the statement of task, which is reproduced here and on the next slide. This specifically deals with the committee identifying additional actions that FDA can take. This is really the essence of the matter. These are the areas that the committee could specifically help with to identify additional actions that FDA can take. The first item is the most critical, that is to formalize the broader public health impacts into our risk-benefit matrix. In the next few slides, I'm going to lay out some of the basic tenets of our drug review and approval process to give you a sense of where we are, to put you in a better position to advise us on how to formally incorporate the broader public health impacts of opioids into the risk-benefit analysis. So FDA's authority to regulate drugs comes from the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which requires that all new drugs have an approved application, meaning pre-market approval, before that drug is introduced or delivered for introduction into interstate commerce. The Act requires that drugs be safe and effective for their labeled conditions of use. When we review new drug applications, we evaluate the data that the company has submitted to support the safety and effectiveness of the drug, in addition to ensuring a quality and consistent manufacturing process. These are the critical elements of our drug review process. Before a new drug application is approved, experimental therapy is evaluated as an investigational new drug, or an IND. Investigational new drugs are exempt from the new drug requirements, namely having an approved application, per Section 505I of the FD&C Act, which states that the Secretary shall put into effect regulations for exempting these investigational drugs in order to investigate the safety and effectiveness of drugs. These requirements apply to all human investigation of products under Section 505 of the Act and biologics under the Public Health Service Act. The IND requirements are set forth in 21 CFR 312, where all of the required elements of an IND application are described to provide the agency with the necessary information to evaluate the safety of the planned study or studies. In this slide, I will cover an overview of drug development and how FDA intersects with that process. Drug development can be broadly separated into 4 stages, which include the pre-IND stage, where non-clinical or animal testing takes place, the IND stage, where human studies take place, the NDA stage, where FDA reviews all available data to support the safety and effectiveness of the product, to weigh the risks and the benefits, and ultimately make a regulatory decision as to whether to approve the application or not, and then the post-approval stage, where safety data continue to be collected on the product. Throughout the IND stage, we provide advice on protocols and review safety, in addition to meeting with sponsors at regular intervals to discuss drug development. Those are the bubbles at the bottom of the slide. At the pre-IND meeting, the discussion focuses on preparation for submitting an IND, as well as on long-range development, and the data that will be needed to support a new drug application. We typically meet with sponsors at the end of phase 2 to review the data that have been collected thus far, to discuss the design of the phase 3 studies, which will be the pivotal studies supporting the new drug application. At the pre-NDA meeting, the planned new drug application is discussed to ensure that the sponsor submits adequate data and that the concerns that have been identified to date are addressed in the application. We also meet with sponsors at other times during the IND stage as needed for issues that arise. For the NDA review, we are implementing a structured approach to benefit risk assessment in drug regulatory decision-making, which you will hear more about later in my presentation. As Dr. Califf mentioned during the July public meeting, we can consider the broader public health impacts in our evaluation of new drug applications. In addition to providing advice at regular intervals during drug development, FDA offers several expedited programs that could potentially apply to the development of products intended to treat pain that do not carry the risks that traditional opioid products carry, and to other products in this area, such as those that directly treat opioid overdose, for example, the naloxone for community use products. These programs are intended to help expedite therapies for serious conditions that address an unmet medical need. We currently approach decision-making around the risks and the benefits of a drug product in three important ways. First, we have the information that sponsors provide to us in a new drug application regarding the risks and benefits of the product. Second, our reviewers consider all the available data to make a qualitative risk-benefit assessment. As part of that process, we are implementing a structured risk-benefit assessment into the evaluation of all new molecular entities. Additionally, there are formal mechanisms in place that require us to reevaluate the risk-benefit and report what we have learned about the safety of the drug product after approval. The third approach is that when needed, we can take an application to an advisory committee to discuss the risk-benefit profile of the drug. As part of the Opioids Action Plan, we have committed to doing more of this for opioids. In 2009, FDA initiated an effort to explore a more systematic approach to the benefit risk with the goal of developing a structured approach that could serve as a template for product reviews as well as a vehicle for clearly communicating the basis of our decisions in drug approvals. When FDA and industry began discussions on reauthorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA, in 2010, an enhanced structured approach to benefit risk assessment was a key topic which resulted in a set of commitments in this area with PDUFA 5. As part of these commitments, FDA will revise its review templates to incorporate a structured benefit risk assessment into the human drug review process. The full draft implementation plan can be found at the link below, and I encourage you to take a look at that. FDA developed a basic structure of a benefit risk framework that includes the following categorization of key decision factors: analysis of condition, current treatment options, benefit, risk, and risk management. Analysis of condition and current treatment options provide a summary and assessment of the severity of the condition that the product is intended to treat and other available therapies to put the risk-benefit into context. The benefits and risk allow for a qualitative summary and assessment of the submitted evidence. Risk management provides a summary and assessment of any efforts that could help to mitigate the identified safety concerns or ensure that the drug is directed to those patients for whom the risk is considered acceptable. And then within each of these factors, there are two considerations that inform the regulatory decision: evidence and uncertainties, and conclusions and reasons. Evidence and uncertainties presents the facts, uncertainties, and any assumptions to address those uncertainties, and the conclusions and reasons captures the conclusions and explains their basis. Some of the tools we have to manage the risks of opioids include development of opioids with abuse-deterrent properties, issuing post-marketing requirements to get real-world data. For example, the post-marketing requirements for ERLA opioids to better define issues surrounding abuse and misuse, and the requirements for opioids with abuse-deterrent properties to understand the real-world impact on abuse and misuse, as well as labeling and risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. I'll go into more detail about the current activities in each of these areas in the next few slides. FDA is actively encouraging the development of opioid drug products that are formulated to deter abuse as one component to addressing the opioid epidemic. These products do not fully prevent abuse, however, they are intended to meaningfully deter abuse. FDA considers development of these products a public health priority, and this is one example of how we are trying to improve the risk-benefit profile of opioids from a public health perspective. The agency has issued guidance and has held public meetings as recently as earlier this week to aid in the development of these products. In this area, FDA has approved 7 opioids with abuse-deterrent labeling. And this labeling generally states that the product, and this is important, has properties that are expected to reduce abuse by certain routes. However, abuse of the drug product by these routes is still possible. This labeling is generally supported by studies conducted in the pre-marketing setting. All of the products have post-marketing requirements to evaluate real-world reductions in misuse and abuse and their associated consequences as a result of the formulation. However, opioid abuse and misuse is very complex, and there are certain limitations to evaluating these outcomes in a real-world setting with the currently available data sources. First, it's very important to note that there is no national abuse surveillance system for pharmaceutical products. It is necessary to understand the limitations of the currently available sources to put any results into context. Most of the data sources are not product or formulation specific, and even the product-specific data sources may not reliably distinguish between products. Additionally, the choice of denominator can have a significant impact on the outcome, and numerators and denominators come from different data sources. As the methods and data sources continue to evolve, we are working through how to best make regulatory decisions based on these data. In terms of improving labeling and patient and prescriber education, this year the agency required updated labeling for immediate release opioid products to update the safety messages and indications similar to what was done for the ERLA opioids in 2013. This will include box warnings and medication guides. The ERLA opioid REMS is one approach to manage risk and improve the risk-benefit balance of these products. This REMS program was recently discussed at an advisory committee meeting in May of this year, and we are actively working on following up this meeting to improve patient and prescriber education. In particular, we heard that the committees wanted the blueprint for prescriber education to include more than just drug-specific information and include education on pain management. The committees also were interested in including the immediate release opioid analgesics in the REMS. All of the actions highlighted on these slides, in addition to the other recent actions FDA has taken in this area that you heard about at the July public meeting of this committee, are aimed at improving the risk-benefit profile of opioid analgesics. We are working to improve the safety of these medicines over time. Traditionally, the formal risk-benefit analysis, as documented in our decisional memos and discipline reviews, has heavily been focused on the risks and benefits to the individual patient. While we have considered the broader public health impacts from opioids in our decision-making, we are asking the committee specifically for advice on how to formally incorporate these broader public health considerations into our risk-benefit analysis for individual products. Thank you. Shall I go back?